I know so far in this fantasy football draft tips series, a lot of these tips seem to be aimed towards beginners. And I want to assure you that that's not necessarily the case. It may come across that way, but I see intermediate level players, advanced level players, very successful fantasy football players make some of these, in my opinion, incredibly ridiculous and stupid mistakes, frankly, mistakes that they should know better than to make. And it astounds me every season when I see it play out. And in the last video, I talked about the stupidity of drafting kickers early, drafting multiple kickers, especially if your league doesn't require it. Why? Why do it? Every year I always wait until the last round to draft my kickers. And wouldn't you know, every year in pretty much every league that I'm in the fantasy playoffs, if not playing for the fantasy football league championship, if not winning the damn championship. Sometimes you win some, sometimes you lose some, but I'm always consistently in the picture, which is all you can really ask for. Once you get to the playoffs, anything can happen, sometimes good, sometimes bad. So I'm speaking from my own personal experiences, trying to give you some of my strategies, some of the things that I have used to success for the close to past decade now. I do them because they work, and I continue to do them because they continue to work. And the people that go against these philosophies and strategies, it doesn't tend to work, and they tend to fail, and they tend to not make the fantasy football playoffs, and they definitely tend to not win championships. And the next part of this series I want to talk about is this whole notion of drafting quarterbacks early. For years, I have been an incredibly huge proponent of waiting to draft your quarterback. And not only that, especially in a league where you only start one quarterback, maybe a standard scoring league or what have you, only drafting one quarterback. Here's my thing about drafting quarterbacks early. I understand that you've got those Peyton Mannings and you've got those Drew Breeses, and when healthy, those Aaron Rodgers that put up a shit ton of points. And you could sit there on given weeks and count for anywhere between 25 to, on a good week, 30 to 35 points out of that position. And that's great. And that's nice to have. But again, that's the outlier. Those are the truly elite. And there are very few of those. And what you find is that when you have to sit there and spend a premium pick in order to get one of those quarterbacks, in the case of a Manning, a Brady, or an Aaron Rodgers, somewhere between the end portion of round one to the middle portion of round three, what you find as you go through your fantasy season is it's great to get those points, but you need those quarterbacks to produce those big points because you lack star talent at either wide receiver or running back, and depth at one or both of the positions. And part of the reason for that is because you drafted a quarterback too damn early. Let's take a look at the 2013 season, for example. You had Peyton Manning, kind of that aberration of a season. Not to say he's not a great statistical quarterback, but I mean, that was even more so than Peyton Manning had ever done. And then Drew Brees was kind of Drew Brees. But when you look at quarterbacks number 3 through number 12, Andy Dalton in standard formats, I believe, was the number 3 quarterback, and Colin Kaepernick was number 12. The difference between number 3 and number 12 was somewhere around 56, 57 points. So about a 3.5 point per week difference. Now, you're going to sit there and say, wow, that's 3.5 points. That makes a big difference. Here's the problem, though. A lot of people sure as hell took Colin Kaepernick earlier than they did Andy Dalton in last year's fantasy football drafts. And how stupid do you feel maybe of spending a 6th or 7th round pick on a Colin Kaepernick when you could have got a quarterback and an Andy Dalton in the middle to late portion of your drafts that scored 50 plus more damn points throughout the course of the freaking season? And even when you look at the case of a Peyton Manning, you see it happen every year. Peyton Manning puts up these incredible numbers throughout the regular season, and teams that own him in fantasy football leagues enjoy great success throughout the regular season, mirroring Peyton Manning's career in the NFL. But wouldn't you know, when it comes fantasy football playoff time, one reason or another, so often those teams quarterbacked by Peyton Manning fail to win fantasy football league championships. And I will tell you this much. I was in 4 leagues last year. Count them, 4 leagues last year. 3 of them I played in the fantasy football league championship game. In all 4 of those leagues, not a single champion or team in the championship game had Peyton Manning as their quarterback. And the reason being is because those teams wasted such a premium pick on Peyton Manning that once he had a bad week, which he kind of did in week 15 against the San Diego Chargers, the 289 yards and 2 touchdowns, it was good, but it wasn't Manning worthy. You had weakened your roster in so many other areas, mainly wide receiver and running back, in order to draft that quarterback so high that you become so dependent on that quarterback scoring big points that when he doesn't, it hurts the rest of your team and you're really setting yourself up to failure. And here's another thing about taking these quarterbacks incredibly early. What happens if they get injured? Like you look at Aaron Rodgers last year. This is a quarterback that traditionally over the past few seasons has been one of the first 2 to 3 quarterbacks taken. Well, shit, he missed almost half the season last year. How stupid do you feel if you took him in the 2nd or 3rd round, especially in a league with only one starting quarterback? And think about it this way. Another quarterback that gets taken early every single year is Tom Brady, somewhere between round 3 and round 4. But wouldn't you know, quarterbacks drafted after him, and I assure you, quarterbacks drafted after him, like Phillip Rivers and Ben Roethlisberger and Russell Wilson and Ryan fucking Tannehill and even Tony Romo, all put up more fantasy football points than a Tom Brady last season. When you look at the top 20 fantasy football quarterbacks, just think about this for a second. Number 17 was Nick Foles in terms of total points, but his points basically came off of half a season. A lot of people won their fantasy football league championships because they picked up Nick Foles on the freaking waiver wire. Hell, number 20 is freaking Geno Smith. Geno Smith scored more fantasy points than a Jay Cutler and an Aaron Rodgers, 2 players that were most surely taken in every single fantasy league draft or close to it, especially those where everybody took 2 quarterbacks for whatever stupid reason. Geno Smith, throughout the course of the entire season, outscored them all. How ridiculous is that? The whole point I'm getting at here is you just can't justify drafting a quarterback so early. Not only do you have the problem of drafting one so early that you place a premium on that position, that you end up hurting the depth in other areas of your roster, because in rounds 2, 3, 4, where you should be drafting running backs, wide receivers, maybe even if it's the right tight end, and shoring up your roster throughout, you're wasting a pick here. And a guy, let's say if you sit there and spend a 3rd round pick on Matthew Stafford, who I think had somewhere around 370 points last year. You drafted him in the 3rd round. Maybe you passed up on a wide receiver like a Brandon Marshall. Just as an example, maybe you passed up on a running back like an Eddie Lacy. And all the while, several rounds later, you could have freaking had yourself Ben Roethlisberger or Ryan Tannehill or even a Nick Foles that wouldn't have scored that much of a difference in terms of points compared to Matthew Stafford. But you could have taken those opportunities that other people failed at by taking quarterback early to address your talent in your starting lineup in other areas. That's why it makes so much sense to wait, especially if you're in, let's say, a 10 or 12 team league and 8 or 9 of the teams ahead of you have already picked a quarterback. Well, if they've already picked one, then you might as wait as long as you possibly can and continue to add the depth in other areas of your roster. Also, this whole notion of drafting multiple quarterbacks. If you're drafting multiple quarterbacks, you are wasting a roster spot. I assure you, when it comes to fantasy football trades, by and large, it's centered around running backs, wide receivers, sometimes to a lesser degree tight ends, but especially running backs and wide receivers. Quarterbacks tend not to be, in what I've seen over the years, that incredibly great of a trade commodity. If anything, they end up tending to be a filler piece, a throw-in piece more than a centerpiece. And if you sit there and think, hey, I'm going to take Peyton Manning in round 3, and then in round 10, I'm going to get somebody like, let's say, a Colin Kaepernick, because somebody's going to have an injury and somebody's going to want to trade for a Colin Kaepernick later on, I assure you, you're not going to get the value back nearly what you think, even if you tried to trade a Peyton Manning. It's just a failed strategy. Not only that, you are wasting a roster spot that could be more effectively filled by a running back or a wide receiver or a tight end, positions that throughout the season you know damn good and well you're scouting the waiver wire, scouring it, trying to find that great find. You're trying to throw all types of bullshit trade proposals throughout your leagues all year long to either trade 3 of your mediocre guys for 1 really good guy, or you're trying to trade 1 of your great guys for 2 or 3 solid guys. This type of stuff happens, so why waste that extra roster spot? To me, drafting quarterbacks early is stupid. because the numbers just don't bear out the importance of doing so. It doesn't support it, especially when you consider the type of running backs that you're passing, or the wide receivers in particular that you're passing, in order to waste that pick early in the draft on a quarterback. And like I said, I saw it again in 2013, as I've seen it over the years. All these people that take Peyton Manning at the end of round 1, round 2, almost none of them were winning fantasy football league championships, at least from the 4 leagues I was in last year. Why? Because they wasted such a high premium pick on a Peyton Manning that if he had one bad week, they were cooked. Because at running back and wide receiver, a position where they needed multiple guys to score big, they didn't have the depth on the talent roster to have multiple guys that could score big. So in my opinion, the best strategy is to sit there and wait to draft your quarterback. Because again, even if you sit there and you look and you see that you didn't get Manning or Breeze or Brady or an Aaron Rodgers, the elites of the elites, the big-time scorers, the Matthew Staffords of the world, what have you, I assure you, there will be a couple of quarterbacks that will score more than some of those guys. It happens every year. It happened in 2013. For crying out loud, Ryan Tannehill scored more fantasy football points than freaking Tom Brady. Russell Wilson scored more. Ben Roethlisberger scored more. Just think about that for a second. So again, are you going to sit there and spend a 3rd round pick in your fantasy football league draft on a Ryan Tannehill? Probably not. Are you going to spend a 3rd rounder on Big Ben Roethlisberger? Again, probably not. So if you're not going to do that, why bother spending a 3rd round pick on a quarterback at all? Wait. Be patient. I promise you, you will still get a good quarterback in the mid to late portions of your draft. Draft one of them. Be confident in your decision. Do your analysis. Maybe sit there and figure out who you think is going to have a kind of bounce back resurgent season. Whether you think that's going to be somebody like a Jay Cutler or an RG3. I guarantee you guys like that are going to put up better numbers than at least a couple of the guys in your league that were among the top 10 quarterbacks drafted. So again, it's foolhardy strategy to sit there and waste such early picks on quarterbacks. Wait to draft them. And then once you do draft one, make sure you got the right one, and only draft one. Don't waste that roster spot because I want to play the matchups, or I want to cover them in case of the fucking bye week. If you're doing that, then you're doomed for fantasy football failure, period.